All right, and we are live. Hey, everyone, we're back at it again. And today I have the honor of having a good conversation with Major uh, Mike Hamilton, and he is based out of Fort Benning, Georgia. So I hope you enjoy today's discussion. And without further ado, I'd like to add Major Hamilton. How you doing, sir?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thankful that you came with short notice and you still agreed to come and talk with me. I think a lot of folks actually want to hear what you got to say as far as information wise, and I think you're from the 20 some odd slides that I got to present on our thing today. I think you've got a lot to say, but a lot of good information that people would appreciate. So
Sure.
I guess, do you want to jump right into the slides, or do you want to talk, tell me a little bit about yourself, or is that part of the slides itself?
So, as part of the slides, I guess before we even get into the slides, I do want to, first of all, just I appreciate you putting this on. I feel bad because as active as I am on the forum that we're both a part of, I haven't watched any of the your sessions or your interviews with anyone,
Hmm.
but this is a great capability, and I really appreciate you hosting this. I do want to just kind of upfront acknowledge that we might have a diverse audience of folks who are both in security force assistance brigades or
Hmm.
SFABs, or hoping or thinking about becoming a part of a security force assistance brigade. And really, the intent of this conversation is to focus on some of the operations and training lessons learned for current SFAB advisors, is particularly team leaders, operations officers at the battalion and brigade level. Having said
Hmm.
that, I think it's a lot of good information for folks who are thinking about joining an SFAB. We
Hmm.
will get into a lot of some details about the mission and the training and things like that, and I hope that doesn't put anyone off. And feel free to ask any questions about it, but I kind of want to keep the
Hmm.
conversation geared toward that audience, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Makes full sense. Okay, so let's go ahead and
Yeah.
you know jump into it, and here we go.
Yeah. So again, I think we cover basically just some lessons learned from my time in First SFAB. I joined First SFAB in 2017 and just recently departed the organization as a Brigade S3 here just last week. And I can't say enough good things about my experience there. It was absolutely one of the best assignments I've ever had.
Hmm.
It was one of the most rewarding assignments I've ever had. And having said that, it's still a relatively new concept. And I felt it was important to, to some degree, kind of share some of the more significant lessons I learned from my perspective.
Hmm.
But before we kind of get into this, I do want to just caveat, what this conversation is going to provide in terms of opinion is just that. It's just, it's my opinion, it's my perspectives, based on my experiences and my assessment of the organization and its mission and the requirements. So, just in red down there on the first slide like this, I do not speak. I do not speak for First SFAB. I don't speak for the Security Force Assistance Command. I don't speak for the Army. I don't
Yeah.
speak for anybody but Mike Hamilton. So please just keep that in mind as we go forward. If you can go to the next slide.
Okay. Here we go.
So just real quick, I'll just kind of talk about myself, my background, talk about the SFAB in general, kind of how we initially stood up, and kind of the direction of the SFAB and the organization. Talk about some security force assistance fundamentals, and then talk operational and training lessons learned. And it says discussion down there at the bottom. I hope this is a discussion throughout.
Hmm.
Um, I will try my best to not make this death by PowerPoint. I have
Hmm.
PowerPoint. The PowerPoint is to remind me about what to talk about, not to read to you. So as we as we go through the slides, just know that, I feel like I know enough about the subject just with my last 3 years of experience to speak to you without necessarily reading the slide. So please reference what's on the slide, but I'm not gonna read them. If you go to the next slide there.
And just want to add on to our viewers, please send in your questions, send in your comments, send in your questions. We will periodically in between the presentation bring up your questions so that Major Hamilton can actually answer them. And, it actually encourages a really strong dialogue between you, the viewer, and Major Hamilton. So here you go, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, I've been in the Army for 16 years, commissioned out of United States Military Academy as an infantry second lieutenant, and currently at Fort Benning, Georgia, where I just departed 1st SFAB as a Brigade S3. Joined 1st SFAB in August of 2017 and began my time there as the 1st Battalion S3 or Operations Officer, and then transitioned after a deployment to Afghanistan to the Brigade S3 position. Really, the pictures that you see here kind of speak to not just my Army experience, but my experience specific to security force assistance. And I think it's interesting to note that, so that bottom left picture there is me as Second Lieutenant Mike Hamilton on my first deployment to Iraq on a joint patrol with, some Kurdish Defense Forces. And every other picture, on that slide is me either currently or about to do something with foreign security forces for their operational mission. And I think that's significant. So essentially, I've got 5 deployments, both in conventional and special operations forces. And I have never had a deployment where there was no interaction with foreign security forces. My last deployment just happened to be my one and only deployment, with a unit that was specifically designed to do security force assistance, and that was 1st SFAB. And so, there's nothing new about, security force assistance, and I'm certainly no stranger to working with foreign security forces with those missions. But I think it was a unique opportunity to belong to the 1st Security Force Assistance Brigade that, for the first time, the Army decided we're gonna specifically man, train, and equip and prepare a unit to do just this specific mission. And I think that's significant. And I enjoyed the experience, and I think that it informs some of my lessons learned going forward. Okay. If you go to the next slide. So again, just real quick, we'll cover some of this information if you go to the next slide. So for those not really familiar with where the SFAB concept came from, the Army for as long as we've been doing overseas contingency operations, since 9/11 and our entry into Afghanistan in 2001, we have leveraged conventional forces who are not specifically trained, manned, or equipped to conduct security force assistance to do those missions. And that's come at a cost. And before SFABs existed, that cost was essentially diverting time and attention of brigade combat teams and their leaders to support security force assistance missions in a way that was really kind of detrimental to their readiness for large-scale combat operations, their core mission. And so the Chief of Staff of the Army at the time, General Milley, wanted to accomplish a few things. One, buy back readiness of the brigade combat teams so that they were not being attrited by supporting Iraq, Afghanistan, and then regionally aligned force missions in Africa with very leader-heavy task forces or elements. while attritting their own readiness. He wanted a capability that was specifically designed for that mission, so it was uniquely capable of doing security force assistance. And then he wanted a capability to complement special operations forces who were conducting special operations, but doing so in conjunction with foreign security forces, and really needed a means to make that security cooperation and that security force assistance complementary to those special operations. And so really those three core, reasons that you see there on the slide were kind of the genesis behind the SFAB concept. A specially trained, manned and equipped force to do the security force assistance mission, to prevent brigades from having to do it and diverting their attention and their readiness, and to complement special operations forces who work hand in hand with foreign security forces in their mission. Okay. Go to the next slide, please. And so, knowing that, right, what this slide kind of is interesting to me, is probably not interesting to anybody else, but our current patch for the SFABs is on the right. You'll notice that it looks similar but different to the previous two patches. The very first patch, that first SFAB, was kind of unofficially putting on his shoulder when it stood up in 2017, was the Advise Assist patch. And then we said, hey, that sounds a little weak. We need something stronger. We need to call ourselves combat advisors. And we kept the design, but changed the tab, and we were calling ourselves combat advisors. And then thank God someone had the wisdom to say, well, first we probably need a symbol that is more closely aligned to some historical, foundation for security force assistance and working with foreign security forces. And you'll notice that the current patch on the right there bears a resemblance to the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, or MAC-V patch, in the shape and color, and then also in the sword. But more uniquely, you'll notice it just says advisor at the top, not combat advisor, not combat advise assist or anything like that. And for the folks who are currently in SFABs, that matters. And I'll say that if you are in an SFAB that's bound for Afghanistan, it doesn't mean much to you. If you're in an SFAB, fifth SFAB that's going to work with partners in the Pacific, or if you're in first SFAB, you're going to work with partners in South America or in Africa where there's no war going on, and you are a guest of that country, and you are essentially just helping to build their capacity and their capability out of combat. The last thing some embassy, country team, security cooperation officer, or even worse, some deputy chief of mission or some chief of mission, some State Department representative wants is for the perception that you're bringing combat to their country, right? So, and really the bottom line is that security force assistance is a very broad mission that happens in and out of combat. And it accomplishes a lot more than just the advise and assist and the combat enabler. And that is really important for the current advisors to know. It's also important for the prospective advisors to know that, hey, you're in the SFAB eventually, not all the time, but you're going to travel, all over a continent, multiple countries to do things that most soldiers, won't ever get a chance to do. And it's the kind of mission that it's broad enough in its scope that it's going to provide a true broadening experience. If you go to the next slide. Okay. And so, Predator. So, yeah, if anyone's familiar with the movie Predator, you're right. So obviously they insert, they infill, they start operating. They think they're kind of up against some typical bad guys, and they're a badass special forces team, and they got all the confidence in the world because they don't understand the situation, right? And then as the as the plot unfolds, there's a lot more to it. And, and I think this is a pretty decent parallel for folks who are recently joining SFAB as a team leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also as an operations officer. I'm not saying that confidence is a bad thing. I'm saying you need to make sure you fully understand the situation, because it is different. It is not what you joined the Army necessarily focused on in terms of conventional operations in a combat environment. Mm-hmm. It is full spectrum. It is joint. It is interagency. It is clearly multinational. It is more than just shoot, move, communicate, for sure. Now, there's probably some of that, in some environments, but you really got to make sure you understand the situation before you assume that being in an SFAB is, just a natural extension of what you've always been doing, because there's more to it. If you go to the next slide. Mm-hmm. So this is an example of one of those slides I am not going to brief in detail, except to say that, if you look at the totality of basically foreign assistance, and then you take what the United States government, and I'm not talking just DOD either, I'm talking about the government, calls foreign assistance, you can narrow some of that down into a smaller sliver of what is security sector assistance. Again, the whole government, not just the DOD. And then within that, there's security assistance, security cooperation, foreign internal defense, security sector reform. And then within security cooperation, there's security force assistance. Mm-hmm. And so going back to words matter, and I can't stress this enough, if you are in a security force assistance brigade in SFAB, you probably need to know what security force assistance is, and certainly to a degree of specificity and detail beyond the conventional force, right? Mm-hmm. So it says it right there, bottom line, DOD activities that support the development of capacity and capability for foreign security forces and their supporting institutions, right? So if it's about building foreign security capacity and capability, then it's security force assistance. You'll see things there like, security cooperation is kind of defined as activities that support the development of capacity and capability, but it's also things that just gain access or develop relationships, and they're not necessarily capacity building. So, and I think that's important to know, because, if you're in an SFAB, you might engage in some activities with foreign partners that won't necessarily build capacity, but they are a priority, in terms of building relationships. So bottom line is just, it's important that you know these. The references are on there, and if anyone's interested in these products, I can send them to them later. But this was just sort of a doctrine map that was useful to me in understanding what security force assistance is.
Okay.
And if you go to the next slide, really, and again, this is one of those that, it would take a day, of frequent multiple touch points to talk about, each one of these doctrinal manuals. But the bottom line is, if you're in an SFAB, it's very important that you understand kind of the doctrinal foundations of security force assistance. And this wasn't something that initially we focused on a lot standing up, but certainly I think as SFAB units move forward, it's important that they understand, hey, these are the doctrinal kind of foundations of security force assistance. And the only thing I'll say about this is, so you got the ATP 3-96.1 there at the bottom right, that's the current SFAB manual, right? But then you've got other manuals that contribute to, the concepts on that previous slide. So I just recommend that, for folks interested in SFAB or currently in SFAB, I think it helps if you kind of start looking at some of these manuals and understand what's in them.
Got it.
If you go to the next slide. So here's the only thing I want to say about this. And I think the easiest way to kind of introduce, again, talking about what security force assistance is and why it's important you fully understand the situation. So I'm just going to tell you a story, right? So a typical security cooperation officer, or SCO, for a U.S. embassy country team, and pick whatever country you want, right? Their scope of responsibility for that security cooperation officer depends on the size of the country team, right? It might be specific to just kind of ground forces for the foreign security force, or it might be their entire military. Imagine if, so you're in your previous military service. Imagine if someone put you in a position with a foreign military and said, okay, you are responsible for improving the operations for this foreign military. And you say, okay, what kind of operations? And they say, yes.
All the operations,
all of them. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so your typical security cooperation officer is a foreign area officer who, is probably a junior, not necessarily very junior, but they're a major. It might be a lieutenant colonel, depending on how big the embassy is. Either way, right, they've got like a base branch and they've got a functional area. Their base branch.
Looks like the storm is acting up again. So let me add back Major Hamilton on the screen. I'm sure he'll be back soon. But in the meantime, let's add you on here. Let's see. Can everyone hear me? Let's add myself back. All right. So Major Hamilton will be back. Once he comes back, we'll get this squared away. But if you're already tracking with us up to now, he has gone through a few slides regarding security forces and the operations that come about with it. He's going to give some more information, of course. There's about 18 more slides to go, but I think, up to now, what he's offering is pretty common sense. He's telling you what he's not going to be talking about. He's not going to read every single slide to you, but give us one moment and let's get this situation taken care of. Okay. In the meantime, I could share this screen with you. Here you go. In the meantime, you could check this out, and I will go ahead and try to get him back on here. There he goes. Hey, sir.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, we are good. We are good. I don't know what happened, but
yeah, me either.
We're good. We're back.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. So, so the bottom line up front, it is a tall order to be told that, hey, you're responsible for improving a military, right? And so I think that a lot of folks kind of underestimate that getting into working with foreign security forces. Like, hey, I've got some experience. They probably make some assumptions about how much experience or capability or capacity the partner force doesn't have until they are in a situation where they're advising, like a brigade or even an institution like a schoolhouse, a training schoolhouse, something like our TRADOC for how to run, or like our JRTC or like our NTC for how to basically do a combat training center type mission. And you realize that, oh crap, I'm a captain, I'm a major, this is really hard. So one of the things, or one of the concepts I think is really important for folks in an SFAB or going to an SFAB to know is, and they kind of hit on it during the Command and General Staff College, so the majors might remember it, but the captains probably won't. So you've got this acronym called DOT-MIL-PF, and that it stands for, doctrine, organization, training, material, leadership and education, personnel, facilities, and policy. And so, it's a more than just a handy framework of thinking of all of the components or the requirements of military capability. It's actually, it goes hand in hand with security force assistance doctrine. And so when you talk the security force task of organize, that's defined as everything done to create, improve, and integrate doctrine, organizational structures, capability constructs, and personnel management. So that's aligned with the doctrine, the organization, and then the personnel. When you talk train, obviously that's aligned with training and also leader development. When you talk equip, that's aligned with the materiel. And so you really can't talk about security force assistance task without understanding, DOT-MIL-PF and that kind of construct. And that it's really important for guys who aren't familiar with it to get familiar with it, learn something new, and just understand that, they might be put in a position where they've got to look at military requirements and capabilities that are well above what their experience was in the U.S. Army, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. It makes sense. I got a question. Can we jump into some of the comments and maybe some of the questions that's already coming in?
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. Let's do that. Let's go ahead and share them on the screen. Well, let's see some of the comments. We got one from Mr. Fred. He said, looking forward to hearing from you both. But hey, Fred, how you doing? I appreciate it. We've got one from the AAAO group. It says, a couple of questions. Will you describe the expectations you have for your field grades and company grade officers as you take command? Are you even there yet to really talk about that? Or do you want to?
So I think this is probably like kind of a general leadership kind of question, not necessarily focused on the SFAB. I can answer it. The general expectation for company grade officers is that they're proficient at TLPs. Their officership fundamentals are sound. And by what I mean by that is, there is nothing in terms of character or Army values that I have to question about that officer, right? Mm-hmm. And then, just kind of basic organization, time management, those things are again, pretty good. I mean, they probably still developing. Most company commanders don't like to admit that they're in the developmental position. They probably think they arrived, but they are still developing, but they should be, again, as one of my old battalion commanders say, when you're a lieutenant, you get issued a pencil, right? Because you're expected to make mistakes and learn a lot, and you can kind of erase those mistakes. When you put captain bars on, they take your pencil, they give you a pen. And it's not to say that the mistakes can be crossed out, can't be edited. They're just a little bit harder because you have a little bit more responsibility, and you're expected to not make as many mistakes. So I guess if that's a general way to describe that. And then for field grade officers, really for company grade officers too, it's a good practice. You need to start thinking 2 levels up, right? Mm-hmm. So, but especially for the field grade officers, like if the expectation is that I don't have to tell you exactly how to do everything, I can communicate intent, and then you turn intent into action. You operationalize concepts. You can organize effort and thought and planning and make progress on something that really just starts with an idea and intent. And then that requires some organizational level leadership skills, some more refined communication, project management, relationship building, relationship maintaining, etc.
Okay.
I mean, the general question there, hopefully that answers that one. Why did you choose SFAB, and what would you say to officers with strong files or weak files? So I'll be honest, I didn't choose SFAB, it chose me, right? So, yes, it is a volunteer organization. Frankly, though, when it was first standing up, the Chief of Staff's guidance was, hey, only top third officer files come to the organization. And the speed with which the organization was standing up, branches just went kind of hunting. And, my file came up and I got a call. I was locked in for one job and I got told I was doing the SFAB. But having said that, I would recommend it for strong file officers. I would recommend it for weak file officers. I would recommend it for anybody, honestly. And the other thing I'd say is if it hasn't come across yet in any of the information we've been talking about, it is absolutely a broadening experience. Again, it's not like an everyday broadening experience, right? Like you're not going to be, it is still the Army, right? You're still going to do Army stuff. You're still going to do PT. You still got to do training management. You still got to do property accountability, that kind of stuff. But there's not many units out there in the Army where a captain could reasonably expect to have a joint interagency working group, with an Army Service Component Command desk officer responsible for security cooperation planning, an embassy desk officer, some other service component project or action officer for a security cooperation effort, and then a host nation. That like that type of joint interagency multinational interaction, and then at the level that they're working with, and to the tune of millions of dollars of funded security cooperation programs. That's something that you can't really say you're going to get at, X battalion, and Y BCT is Z division. You know what I'm saying?
Got you. All right. So let's go ahead and jump back into the slide. Do you want to jump into the next one, or are you good with this?
Yeah. So you go ahead and jump into the next one. And I think this is, it's a good discussion point. Hopefully we get some questions on this. So I think this is a good summary of kind of the biggest lessons learned from just watching SFAB teams and SFAB units operate, not just in Afghanistan, but initially as first SFAB pushed out across various countries on the African continent. Some of these things stood out. And the first and foremost, the mission command philosophy of using mission type orders to achieve commander's intent, disciplined initiative, all that stuff. Like you can't do security force assistance without living the epitome of mission command philosophy. It is literally impossible. So, to the folks who prefer to operate that way, prefer to be given wide latitude to exercise discipline, initiative. I can't think of a better organization to join, and I sincerely mean that. And it's not like an optional thing, like right where someone can say, yeah, we like Mission Command, but hey, I need you to do this and this and this specifically, and give you no room to operate and kind of micromanage everything you do. There is no micromanaging when you're a continent away with just a 12-man team. There, you know what I'm saying? Like it's impossible. There is no micromanaging when the battalion or the brigade has upwards of 100 security cooperation cases in support of a Army Service Component Command. They've got to push all that stuff down and delegate it down, and trust that post KD captains and majors can speak on behalf of not just their brigade, not just on behalf of USARAF or RSAL, but speak on behalf of the U.S. Army and the U.S. government, in that country with that host nation. And if there's a quote, I'll mess it up, but it's something like true freedom is a frightening thing, because what you quickly find out is that no help is coming, right? Like it is just you that is going to make stuff happen. And it has to be, because again, you're a country away, you're a continent away, and it's just you trying to communicate and make stuff happen. So I listed there the 6 kind of principles of mission command. Not going to go over all of them in great detail, but you don't get something for nothing. So mission command is great. Everyone wants to have as much freedom as possible, but it comes at a cost. So you got to build teams, you got to build trust, you got to create shared understanding. So if I don't have the same understanding that you do, I come to different conclusions, I make different assumptions, and we're not on the same page, and it's hard to operate that way. Obviously, commander's intent has to be clear, has to be understood. You have to listen to it and not what you want to hear. But all those things are important. Disciplined initiative means, doing what needs to be done to accomplish the intent, not what you want to do. That's, the discipline part. And then mission orders, I don't have to tell you exactly how to do everything. I just tell you kind of what needs to get accomplished. And then accept risks, right? So I think the biggest takeaway, and it'll translate into the training lessons learned, is, this is a mission essential requirement. It's not just a good suggestion or a good idea in an SFAB. And kind of on the same lines, the next point there, leader development is essential, right? So, imagine a mission where you're taking a captain, a sergeant first class, a couple staff sergeants, and then combination of E5s and E6s from various MOSs, putting them on a 12-man team, sending them to a continent away or a country away, and telling them, hey, check in, once a week, or and let me know how you're handling this this security cooperation case worth like tens of millions of dollars, just FY. If guys are not like integrating leader development for that population, for that team, those soldiers and those junior officers into their training, they're insane. Because you can't, you reap what you sow, right? Like, so if you don't train those leaders, those junior officers and NCOs, and mold them and mentor them into the kind of person who, the kind of people and the kind of soldiers and leaders and teams who can do mission command, then you can't expect them to do it properly. And you're going to put yourself in a position where you either don't trust them to do what they need to do, or you're assuming too much risk in giving them those tasks. So you like, developing leaders is essential. And then culture matters, right? Like, so you can't operate or say you need to operate one way when you're deployed and then don't operate that way when you're at home station, because you're not building the culture you need to be successful during your operation. So all of that has to translate into, how an organization conducts itself at home station to develop that culture and that mindset to be prepared to operate downrange.
Okay. Awesome.
Penny, any questions on that?
No questions from, well, hold on. We've got a few questions coming in.
Okay.
We've got one. Let's put it up on the screen right here. It says, do you have a relationship interaction with your country's security operation officer and defense attaché officers? Did you see any collaboration between the SFAB and the FAO community? So
yes and yes. Simple answer. And kind of as described before, once the brigade gets assigned the security cooperation missions and cases, and then they task those cases and those missions down to the battalions, and they task them down to the teams. Essentially, those teams are given given Durloth in some cases to.
That is doing it again. Come on,
Uh-oh.
internet. All right, we're back. The internet is doing it again.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So yes, simple answer. It is a regular occurrence for teams to have interaction with security cooperation officers, not necessarily defense attachés because they tend to be more senior 06 level. But the bottom line is they do have embassy interaction. It's not, I wouldn't say it's like every day, but it's certainly more than what the conventional force would get under normal circumstances. And the collaboration between SFABs and then foreign area officers, absolutely, because it's mission essential. Like that's part of the mission, especially outside of areas like Iraq and Afghanistan, is essentially obeying the rules and operating by the guidelines of that country team in support of their integrated country strategies, or ICSs. So SFABs work hand in hand with security cooperation officers and foreign area officers.
Okay. So we got another SFAB question. I'll put it up. It says, is the SFAB composed in a similar manner as the SF group, similar to having team leaders, team sergeants, companies, battalions under the brigade?
So yes, it is similar. The team structure is very similar for the maneuver advisor teams. 12 soldier team, captain, team leader. For the captain teams, the company headquarters teams do have major teams similar to ODBs or Operational Tactical Bravos have majors as company commanders and team leaders. I'd say the biggest difference, other than the mission set, and I won't get into that here unless someone really wants to. The biggest difference between how the groups are structured and how SFABs are structured is the size of the headquarters, and then the lack of kind of forward support companies or group support battalions and elements within the SFAB. So there ain't no GSB. There's a 6th battalion, but that's a logistics advising battalion. They're just logistics advising teams. They are not like forward support companies, and the headquarters are much smaller in SFABs because, again, they're focused on security force assistance, not necessarily mission command or team support.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that question. So you want to jump into the next slide?
Yeah, we can go ahead and jump to the next slide. So,
come on. Is that it? What's going on? Man, we have a little bit of Murphy's Law going on. There we go.
Yeah,
there we go. All right.
Yeah, so really the only thing I'll say about this is advising is a unique skill set. And I think that for the folks either in an SFAB or coming to an SFAB, you really have to stop before you show up, before you start doing SFAB stuff, either training or operations, and really think about what are the essential elements of security force assistance and advising, because none of us get trained on those essential elements coming into Army organizations. Like you don't go into too much in depth in communication skills, certainly not cultural awareness or emotional intelligence or negotiating or anything like that in a BOLIC. And you're not focused on that stuff during a intensive training cycle at a BCT. And so the challenge is for folks that are in an SFAB or coming to an SFAB is, how are you mentally preparing yourself for a kind of a shifting your focus about what your core skills and competencies are. Now, that's not to say that your basic soldier tasks are no longer important in SFAB. They absolutely are, especially if you're going to a high risk environment. You still got to be able to shoot, move, communicate in terms of force protection. But the bottom line, that's not your core skill. Yeah. That's a prerequisite. Like you gotta, you got to do that like you got to put gas in your car. The purpose of a car is not to hold gas, it's to go somewhere. And so, like, again, you move, shoot, move, communicate, as a prerequisite. But if you stop there, you're going to miss out on, what your core skill set is.
Okay.
If you go to and honestly, the only thing I'll say on this, because I think this next slide on leader development, so if I like these pictures. So if you look at these pictures, these are from our first deployment. You got a guy giving a class to looks like a platoon of ANA on the left on how to give an IV. Another guy, kind of wrapping up an engagement there in the middle with an ANA soldier. And then someone looks like they're doing some TLPs. All those guys were promotable specialists. And so if you think about what they're doing versus what your typical specialist in the Army does, I think you got to ask yourself, team leader, like, what are you doing to prepare that, specialist or that brand new sergeant or that staff sergeant even to operate at the next level? And again, going back to that conversation about, leader development, I just personally, I don't think you can do quality advisor training without also doing leader development, because I think it's just completely integral. If you go to the next slide. And honestly, I think we hit on this already. An ethos or a way of life, or organizational culture. You gotta define what you think that is for SFAB units. It's a little different. Okay, the core of it, should absolutely include your Army values, soldiers, creed, warrior ethos kind of stuff. But it's got to be more than that. It's got to be something that creates an environment that nurtures attitudes and behaviors essential to advising. Cultural awareness, communication skills, empathy, all that kind of stuff. Like if that's not part of how you just do normal business, then you're missing something.
Yeah. Okay. Let's jump to the next. Come on, Murphy.
Yeah. So I think the 3 points here. So all these things that we talked about, kind of high-minded, whereas like, emotional intelligence and critical thinking and all that stuff, like ultimately, those things are important. They're very important, but it's even more important that a team leader or an operations officer figure out how to operationalize those. And when I say operationalize them, it's like, okay, that's great. You got to have like, emotional intelligence and empathy, and you got to build rapport and all that stuff. How do you execute the operations process of plan, prepare, execute, assess, security force assistance training, integrating those concepts into how you plan, how you prepare, how you execute, and then how you assess, your missions? Because again, if you don't have a deliberate plan for how you weave in prep for negotiations, how you weave in, assessing your current rapport and your kind of messages with the partner. If you don't have a plan or SOPs at the team level for how to do that, it's not going to happen, or it's not going to happen like, to the extent that it needs to. Understanding training management and training doctrine. I think the bottom line up front with this, and there's more to talk about here, but as you can imagine, everything we talk about so far, there's a lot to train on. And if you can't manage training and you can't manage time and execution of training, you're not going to be successful. And you're going to come up short on capabilities. And then lastly there, so for an organization that is specifically designed to train, advise, assist foreign security forces, you can't do crappy training for yourself and expect to just like turn it on when it's time to train someone else. The way you train yourself is training you to train foreign security forces. So training is training. Like every time you go to the range or you put together a block of instruction on negotiations, or every time you train your own team and yourself, you are practicing, what you are later going to do for training a foreign security force, because you can't magically just expect it to go well, downrange or with a foreign partner force if you can't manage it for yourself. Go ahead and skip to I'm not going to go over all these. Go to the key ideas here. So we already kind of talked about the doctrine and just being familiar with that. So critical thinking is important. And a lot of people think about critical thinking. They think it's like that their idea about critical thinking kind of ends with some college class, right? It's not something that is living and operating every day in their lives. Why it matters to advisors is that, you've got to understand biases, how they negatively impact your ability to assess an environment and a foreign partner force, and how they negatively impact your decision-making about, advising priorities and advising activities. And if you don't fundamentally understand those cognitive biases and techniques to kind of red team against them and think critically, you're going to end up steering your advising and your training and your security force assistance efforts toward things that you are biased for or against.
So let me ask a question on that then. How do you counter that? How do you counter that implicit bias that you may have in regards to that?
Yeah, so the first thing is to be aware of it, right? Mm-hmm. So there's probably too many cognitive biases to list off. I certainly haven't memorized them, but everyone's heard of groupthink, right? Mm-hmm. So groupthink is a phenomenon where the introduction of an idea is basically just parroted by everyone in the group, and no one formulates an idea independent of that original idea. Yeah. And so translate, how does that impact the team's ability to assess a foreign partner force's capability to conduct operations? If someone can't provide a counter argument or provide a counter proposition to why a unit is rated as trained, practiced, or untrained for a certain capability based on evidence that they collected during an assessment, and they just go along with like, yeah, these guys suck, then eventually you're going to end up wasting a bunch of time. Overconfidence. So the assumption that you are probably more right than you are wrong, absent evidence, is a bias, right? And it's a pretty common one. So
is that Dunning-Kruger?
So that is certainly relevant. And I think the thing that they both have in common is like, hey, look, don't be so quick to jump to conclusions about what you think and what your conclusions are in terms of like what you do or your recommendations are based on that limited information. So the bottom line is, and so all of this is, I like to draw the analogy of take a look at what we're doing in Afghanistan. This is just Mike Hamilton's opinion, but not a ton of progress developing capacity and capability of Afghan National Army, right? Now, you could argue that they're good enough for what they need to do in terms of area security operations, or an alternative theory is that hey, maybe we've been going about conducting security force assistance the wrong way with them and not truly building capacity because we focus on the wrong things, because we normally, or we're naturally inclined to do this thing or that thing or this effort, and we haven't really thought about a better way to do it, right? Planning, I think that's a given, but I think what's key here is, again, who's your population within that team that needs to understand TLPs and MDMP even? You know, is it like brand new sergeants and is it like staff sergeants who never spent the day on staff, never went to battle staff, never went to any of the professional military education courses? So yeah, you captain or, you know, major have got to bring those guys up to speed if you expect them to do it. So organizational culture and change theory. I mean, the core of security force assistance is basically leading organizational change in the foreign army or in a foreign military. So, you know, understanding the concepts of organizational culture and change, various change theories like Cotter change model might help if you're, you know, trying to affect some organizational change. If you go to the next slide. Communication skills. I think that if you had to tell the average officer or NCO for that matter, hey, the only thing that your boss's boss is going to know about what you're doing is going to come in a once a week email from, you know, a continent away, you would probably think real hard about what to type in that email.
Yes.
Right. And so if you suck at writing, or if you suck at, you know, distilling your thoughts, synthesizing your ideas into very clear written messages that are, you know, that are able to communicate, you know, key points and ideas, then that's something you got to work on because it's actually mentioned essential. Kind of negotiations, key leader engagement, guardianage. Bottom line is there's a wide span of things that, you know, a team needs to be proficient at, and they gotta. Yeah, sure. So training management. Bottom line is you can assume risk on some capabilities and not train some stuff, but, you know, are you willing to accept that risk, and what is the risk to your mission if you don't develop that capability? That's a fair question. Go ahead and go to, I'm going to skip through a lot of this stuff. So go to the common mistakes in training management. So I think, and this really applies to more than just the SFAB, I think. So, but some common mistakes that we see is, you know, so the training is not mission focused. Again, you might like to shoot a lot, but is shooting a core or essential component of security force assistance? Is your training realistic? You know, are you designing, you know, your training exercises, your key leader engagements, your negotiations? Are you designing those things to be realistic? Again, the prioritization, you can't train on everything. So how are you going to accomplish as much of your training objectives as possible, as efficiently as possible? Time management, I'll tell you that for anyone thinking about joining SFAB there, you're certainly not like burning the midnight oil and staying late like every day. There's time in the day. There's lots of opportunity to accomplish training, but not if you're disorganized and you can't manage your time. So you definitely got to be organized and have a plan for how you manage your time. Ill-defined standards. So, you know, how are you training? Are you training just to train, or are you training to some standard? So I think, you know, again, if you go through a step training model, have a plan for how you're going to evaluate the training. The evaluation requires some identification of the standards or measures of performance or performance measures for those tasks. Don't just train just to do it. You got to be able to say, hey, we did well based on something that's as objective as you can make it, or at least as specific as you can make it. And then the last two there, untrained leaders. Again, you gotta prepare guys to lead the training. Otherwise, you're just going to get whatever they want to focus on. And then not integrating your lessons learned back into how you operate. So again, are you just going through the motions to go through the training event, or are you actually like doing AARs and then not just making them making a pretty PowerPoint to send it in an email, and then you never look at those lessons learned again? How are you incorporating them back into your SOPs and how your team operates? If you go to the next slide there, so the only thing I'll say about this is, your typical green, amber, red cycle, within an SFAB gives you a lot of time to actually develop individual tasks. But what's difficult is, as you can imagine, there's a lot of schools requirements. So medics got to do, medic certification, fires, like advisors, 13 Foxes have got to do joint fires observer training. And so it becomes a shotgun blast of like everyone has to go do their own like individual training stuff. And so the question is, how do you manage training while half your team is gone at schools? And there's no good answers for it. Maybe the answer is you just accept that you try to pack all that individual training into a window, accept that everyone's gone in that window, and then you limit your collective training to when everyone gets back from that, or at least the majority of the folks get back from that. Go to I'm going to skip through a lot of this stuff. So I think go to the one that says team collective tasks and standards. So I think the bottom line with this is it goes back to, again, are you just training just to train, just to do a storyboard, just to say you did training? Or are you actually evaluating that training based on some performance measures? Are you training the standard? There was, so in first SFAB, there was an effort to develop, training tasks for teams, because as you can see, the challenges there, advisor teams below the company level don't have official medals within the Army Combined Arms Training Strategy or within ATN. So the challenge is, hey, if you don't have a medal, you don't have a specific task, and those tasks don't have very clear standards, what exactly are you training on? So again, this is just a way. These are some products that First SFAB has developed. If you're in a different SFAB and you're interested in these, we can make sure you get them. I know all the Brigade 3s and the other SFABs have at least seen them once. But if you don't use this, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is, like, what is your standard? Have you identified the standard before you jump right into training? Does it matter to you? Is really the question. And I think honestly, I think that's where we'll leave it. We're at about an hour here, and like I said, I could talk all day about this stuff, but I'll stop with this, and we can just kind of go into any Q&A. It's a very important capability. It's a very important mission set. It's very new. A lot of the things that we talked about here are just kind of some observations about how to solve some very new problems. So the Army hasn't figured this out. There's not a single SFAB, to include first SFAB, they have all the answers. They figured out exactly how to do all this stuff and how to improve on this capability. So it's a lot. It's really a lot on the guys joining these SFABs to be very organized and meticulous and disciplined about how they develop their teams and how they prepare for their missions. But I'm always here to help. No longer in first SFAB. We're moving on to Fort Bragg here at the end of the year, but I'm available if anyone's got any questions or wants to talk any further about any of this stuff.
Okay. Well, so it looks like, as far as the questions, they're the ones that have already been posted. There's one person that's asking, hey, will these slides be posted in the AAO website? Yes, you can always reach out to, of course, to Major Hamilton if you've got a question about the slides itself. I'm sure, right?
Yeah,
Sir?
I'll just say I rather not post any of this because again I wouldn't want any of this to be taken like for attribution or as some sort of official like policy or anything. Yeah. If you're interested, I can shoot them to you. You just send me a direct message and I'll with your email address and I can send them to you separately. But I prefer to not post them.
Okay, good call on that. Good call on that. Well, sir, whoa, we've got a little one in the background.
Yep.
Hey, as a dad myself, I know my little ones probably want me as well. But so what I'm going to do, sir, is we will go ahead and I guess end our discussion for right now. I just want to say, of course, thank you for coming and just giving us that good information that, I'm sure a lot of folks are now piqued their interest. Like, oh, what's this SFAB thing all about? Let me find out a little bit more about it. And I think you gave a really good discussion and presentation of it all.
Okay. Hopefully it was useful. Hopefully it hit at least a portion of the target audience. And if for anyone that kind of went over their head, hopefully it was at least interesting at times. But yeah, let me know if y'all got any questions.
Awesome, sir. From one dad to another, have a good afternoon, and I appreciate you coming and talking with me.
All right, thanks. I appreciate you doing this.
All right, bye.
Bye.
So we had Major Hamilton come and give us really good information. If you want to reach out to him, send him a DM on Facebook. I'm sure he'll be glad to help you out. And as I always say in parting, take care of yourself, take care of your family, and take care of others. Bye now.